Howdy guys, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about how to fly a drone for complete beginners. I automatically want to start with a disclaimer of this is not going to teach you the actual skills, muscle motions, or any muscle memory of flying a drone. I'm rather going to be talking about what each stick does, how a controller works, and some tips that you can do when first flying to reduce your crashes. So without further ado, let's jump right into the video. The first thing we need to talk about is choosing a correct drone. Now, what I always recommend is something basic, cheap, and if you crash it, completely destroy it, you're not completely breaking your bank. The first drone I bought, I completely destroyed. I ran into a tree, it got stuck way high up, and during the recovery process, I broke it even more. However, this was fairly cheap. I think I brought it for like 20-25 bucks a few years ago, and it did the job to get me to learn. So I want to start by saying, get something that if you crash it, you're not going to be upset about, because crashes are inevitable and it happens to everyone. Second thing about buying a starter drone. A lot of these new drones, like $100 plus, will claim to have self-hovering. I don't recommend starting with a drone that will hover by itself, as it doesn't actually teach you how to fly it. A real drone is going to continue to drift in the wind. It's not going to just hold position like my Mavic does. And the closest thing I can relate to this is I have some racing drones. They're completely raw, they don't have any stabilization, so no matter what orientation you let go of the sticks, it's just going to continue traveling whatever direction you set it as. And what I mean by that is if you push the stick forward and the drone's traveling forward and you let go of the sticks, it's just going to keep traveling forward. So when buying a drone, don't get something that has self-hovering, as it doesn't actually teach you the motions of flying it, and therefore it doesn't feel like a true learning experience. Now, before actually flying a drone, let's talk about what they're capable of doing. A drone is essentially a four-bladed airplane that's capable of hovering. So therefore, by not moving forwards or backwards, it can go up, it can go down, it can go left, it can go right, it can go forwards or away from us, and it can go backwards. It also has a motion called yaw, which is essentially spinning around a point, which we will show later down the video. Drones are becoming super popular as it's a way to get into flying that you can almost like pause. If you're an RC plane flyer, you can't exactly put an RC plane into a hover unless you are a super advanced flyer, but with a drone, it naturally wants to hover, and so therefore, you kind of have time to think about what you want it to do. To talk about the sticks, I went ahead and recorded it on my GoPro, so the audio quality might change quickly, but I'm at a park, and now let's talk about the sticks. Now, quick note before you look at the sticks, at one point of the video, I reversed my lefts and rights, so my apologies. You'll hear me say, when I push the stick to the left, the drone's going to go left when I'm pushing the stick to the right, so I did make a quick mistake there, so my apologies. Looking here at the sticks, we can talk about what each one does. Now, this is a Mode 2 transmitter, meaning the left stick is going to control up and down and your yaw motions, and your right stick is going to control forwards, backwards, left to right. When buying a drone, you want to make sure your transmitter is in the mode you want. I always fly in Mode 2, most pilots fly in Mode 2, but Mode 1 is just reversed. So this stick would control your forwards, backwards, left, and right, and this would control your actual up and down movement. So, dumbing that all down, let's go through each motion that you can move the stick. If you want the drone to ascend, the stick you have to move is the left, and you want to push it up. Up towards the sky, the drone's going to come up. Want it to go down, you're going to pull the stick down, and it's going to descend. Want it to move directionally right, you're going to move to the right stick to the right, or if you want it to move to our left, you're going to move it to the left. If you want it to move away from us, you're going to push forward. You want it to come back, you're going to pull down. I always caution new pilots, when you're first beginning to fly a drone, don't touch the left stick other than wanting to move up or down. Almost imagine there's a lock and the only way you can move it is up or down. And I say this because if you yaw the drone in a direction, so looking here you can see the Mavic on the soil, it's facing away from us, meaning if I were to push the stick forward, it would actually move forward. If I push the right stick back, it'd come back towards us. But as soon as you yaw it in a weird direction, now the drone's imagining it's going this way. So unless we orient ourselves with it, now if I were to push this stick forward, it's actually going to travel to the left. And this is because we have to imagine wherever way the camera is facing is the way the drone's going to travel. New pilots, what you might want to do is every time you accidentally yaw your aircraft, face with it again. So now that I'm facing the aircraft, so you can see my feet are in line with the drone, and I would push the stick back forward, it's actually going to go directionally my forward. If I were to continue standing the way that we started as, and I push the stick forward, it's going to travel to the left, and if I push it back, it's going to travel to the right. This is what gets a lot of new pilots in trouble, got me in trouble a lot learning how to fly, and it's something we want to avoid.
So on your first couple flights, avoid yaw.
Continuing on that, avoiding yaw is not something you necessarily have to do, but keep in mind, once you yaw it, it's going to be a different orientation than you remembered, so you kind of have to do almost like, you have to think in your head, oh right, the camera's facing away from me now, or the front of the drone's facing away from me now, so what is each stick actually going to do? So the first couple of flights, once you take the drone off, and it's just kind of at, 5 to 10 feet in the air, don't touch the left stick and just practice going forwards, backwards, left to right, almost making like a rectangle pattern. Talking about the sticks, before we can actually fly the drone, we have to look at our flight environment. When your first couple of flights, choose somewhere that's open and there's not many things you could damage. I always like parks. Parks are great, they're open, there's big fields, there's a lot of room for like error, and if you were to run into something, it's most likely going to be the tree or ground. However, if you're flying in a residential neighborhood and you lose control of it, you could hit someone's car, you could hit someone's house, or you could even hit a person that's, say, walking down the street. And so therefore, on your first couple of flights, when you're very new to the hobby, go somewhere that there's not much around, and if you were to hit something, it wouldn't be a big deal. Next thing I always caution against, do never fly above the trees when you're first learning to fly. A lot of people like to see, okay, let's see how high my drone can go. Now, although starter drones aren't nearly going to make it to 400 feet, which is the legal limit, as soon as you get above the trees, you have a risk of a flyaway situation. Winds are always a lot stronger above the trees, as those trees almost act as a natural wall, and if it were to start to drift away from you, and say you yaw it and then you get all disoriented and you don't know how to bring it back towards you, it could drift past the trees and your drone's gone. So your first couple of flights don't exceed more than 5 to 10 feet. Now in this video, I'm kind of just summarizing every drone. I'm not talking about how to fly the Mavic Air 2 specifically, and we're not talking about how to fly, say, a Cyma specifically, we're just talking about drones in general. So you see in this next clip, the drone starts in a hover, so I don't explain how to take off, because every drone's takeoff sequence is a little different. Look in the manual, see how it says to take it off. Some drones you push the stick down and centered, some you'll just push the left stick up, some you'll push the left stick in. There's an infinite amount of ways manufacturers use to actually have the propeller start to spin and take off. Just on a takeoff, don't just instantly apply full throttle. Gradually increase it until it gets into a hover, and once it's in a hover, let's take a look.
So just as we talked about, you can see what each stick does in action. So if I go ahead and push the right stick forward, you can see the aircraft is going to move away from me. Now remember, I'm not touching this left stick at all. I pull the stick back, the aircraft's going to come back towards me. Push it to the left, it's going to go left. And I push it to the right, it's going to go right. So that's the fundamentals of flying a drone, is this left stick. Forwards, backwards, left, and right. Now that we have talked about that, remember, let's talk about yaw. So I described yaw as just moving the aircraft around a point without moving it forward, backwards, left to right. And so you can see if I push this left stick all the way to the left, you can see the drone is essentially just spinning around a point. Now if I were to stop it facing towards me, so now you can see the camera is facing towards me, it no longer is going to really be practical as if I were to push the stick forward, which remember, last time when I pushed the stick forward, the drone went away from me. Now when I push the stick forward, it's actually coming towards us. And if I push it backwards, it's going to go away from us. Since the front of the drone now is facing towards us, everything's completely reversed. So pushing to the left, it's going to travel right, and pushing to the right, it's going to travel left. And this is why I typically caution stay away from this left stick. It's because as soon as you yaw your drone away from the center, your controls are going to suddenly be reversed. Now, although with the camera facing towards me, it's not too hard to understand. You essentially just reverse whatever you'd imagine. So if you want to travel to the left, you'd actually push the stick to the right. And if you want to travel to the right, you're actually going to point the stick to the left. And remember what I was saying, imagine yourself in that cockpit. Imagine yourself sitting in the camera, so now since the camera's facing me, we actually need to turn around. And so now we're looking, since at this tree straight ahead, you can see if I were to push the stick now to my right, the drone's traveling what appears to the right. So yawing is one of the hardest things to understand. Once you grasp it, it's not too hard. Putting ourselves in a really tough situation is when the drone's facing to the side. You can see the red status indicator pointing down the trail, and the green blinking lights pointing back towards the front of the trail. So now you can see if I were to push the stick forward, the drone's actually going to travel to the left. If I pull the stick back, it's going to travel back to the right. This is what gets a lot of new pilots into trouble. they yaw the drone in a direction they're not used to, and the Mavic's fairly easy to tell which direction you have it yawed to based on the camera. But drones that don't have a camera or any lights or anything like that, it's really easy to get yourself disoriented. So you might be flying around having a great time, and suddenly it's yawed in this really weird dynamic. You can see it's actually a 45-degree angle to us, so the camera is pointed kind of back towards like my bag and all that stuff. So now say, okay, I know I want the drone to go away from me, and typically that's by pushing the stick forward. If I were to push the stick forward, well, it's not going to move because of that obstacle avoidance, but if I were to push the stick forward, you can see it's going to, come on baby, it's sensing those trees. But now everything's reversed. If I actually want it to move away from us, I actually have to move the stick to the right and slightly back, and that's kind of at like a 45-degree angle from me. This is when things get difficult, and overall, yaw gets pilots into a lot of trouble.
Now that we have talked about what drones to kind of start off with, and what I mean is what to buy first, so remember, something cheap, doesn't self-hover, pretty archaic, something that can just teach you the basics. We talked about what environment to fly in, we talked about what each stick does, and we showed an aircraft, or my drone flying, and me interacting with the sticks and what the drone does in response. To end this video, and to keep it short and sweet, I want to bring up a mode known as Headless Mode. So a lot of new drones have a mode called Headless Mode, which basically takes yawing out of the equation. So by clicking a button on some beginner drones, it enters into Headless Mode, and so now if I were to yaw the drone to the left, the sticks are still going to perform as you would expect. So meaning, even if the front of the drone is facing to my left and I push the stick forward, you know, just as we were talking about, it should theoretically go towards our left. It's actually going to go away from us. Headless Mode takes yawing out of the equation. It's kind of a little bit hard to describe, but essentially it just takes yaw out of the equation. No matter what yaw orientation the drone's in, if you push the right stick forward, it's going to go away from you. You push it to the left, it's going to go to the left. Push it to the right, and back. Push the stick back, it's going to come back towards you. Headless Mode is almost like a way to cheat, and I don't recommend Headless Mode, just as I don't recommend flying a drone that has GPS to learn. Learn on something hard, get all the basics down, and then slowly upgrade your way to whatever drone you want. And once you know you have the basics down, it's a lot less stressful flying. And you know, I've never crashed my Mavic. I rarely have any stressful situations flying it because I have such a good baseline down, and overall it makes the hobby a lot more enjoyable. So when you're learning how to fly, don't cut corners. In conclusion, I'd like to thank you guys all for watching. This video was trying to be as short and sweet as possible. This isn't an in-depth tutorial. I do have some in-depth tutorials like with the Mavic and my channel, but it's more just explaining what each stick does, what I'd recommend for beginner drones, and what I'd recommend for a beginner flight environment. Remember, practice makes perfect. Just as with anything, you can't expect to pick up a controller and expertly fly. It's going to take time, it's going to take some crashes, but it's okay. If you have any questions about learning how to fly, don't hesitate to leave them in the comments below. I'd like to thank you again for watching. Leave a like if you liked this video, a dislike if you didn't, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Thanks.